Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to take on a kind of a special reel. It's one that was found in I'm told, a barn. It belonged to this individual's grandparents, his grandfather in particular, and hadn't been fished in a long time. It was sitting on a rod, and when they were cleaning out their barn, they decided they were going to start throwing things out, and they had the presence of mind to keep this reel, and now they've asked me to put it back to working condition. So this is an Ocean City 112. The Ocean City 112 had a slightly bigger brother called the 113, and also had very close cousins in the Bay City reels, and they were produced up to about 1957 or so. This reel is suffering, I will call it dried grease inside. It does turn. It turns very hard. This line must be at least 15-20 years old. It's got UV fade on it and everything. It's a heavier line, so it was used in salt water. But otherwise, it seems like, for the most part, the reel is functioning the way it should. You have a free spool, and you have a drag. Now, I think what I'll do here is I'm going to make sure that we change the drag washers out. I can't believe that they're any good anymore, but we'll find out as we take these apart. The important thing to note when you're working on an old reel like this, or you're considering purchasing one, is that make sure that the side plates are solid and not cracked, that the reel turns. Even if it doesn't turn freely, make sure that it at least turns. Make sure that you test, as we did, the function with the free spool, test the drag stack, and just cosmetically give it a look over as well. So these are interesting reels, and we're going to start by taking it apart. And interestingly enough, you take it apart by removing this screw on the handle, and that handle is actually a wrench. So we'll show you how to do that. While we're doing that, I want to thank our first responders and essential personnel and everybody involved in keeping us safe during the pandemic. Fire, rescue, EMT, health workers, and essential workers in areas like transportation and food delivery and the like. Thank you for all it is that you do. I'm just putting a little bit of penetrating oil on there. I've noticed we have some green corrosion. I want to make sure that this nut has a little chance there. It's actually a screw, the handle screw. Has a little chance of having some of that seep behind it to make it easier to take off. We're going to use the wrench that comes right with this. If you don't have that wrench, I think it's a 14 millimeter. I could be wrong, but some of these handles are more set up with the what you would expect to see, say, on a pen reel or that. So these reels were made up until 1957, bearing the Ocean City name, and then they were acquired by True Temper, and after that, you started to see the reel, identical reel, but just branded under True Temper. That lasted through early 60s, and then the legacy kind of went away. So one of the problems that you have with this reel is this handle oftentimes gets stuck, and there's no easy way to free that handle up, unfortunately. All right, we have a little cap washer on there. We have the star adjuster, which we're going to take off. And this is all to enable us to get to that side plate. Then we have our gear sleeve, which puts the pressure onto the drag stack. We have about 7 screws, I'm going to guess. 7 screws. We're going to take them off, and it doesn't hurt. Again, use a penetrating oil, hit both sides of the reel, just to see if you can't help those screws come out. On an old reel like this, it's easy to snap screw heads. Now on this particular reel, that rarely happens because these screws are pretty hardy. But if you're working on reels like a spinning reel or the like, which may have a little bit more of a fragile screw, then go ahead and take the precaution like we just did here to remove those. All right, you're seeing I'm taking them out. I'm going to lay them on the workbench first because I want to make sure that they're all the same size. Probably not. I also use a parch tray. It's the bottom of a jug. I just put all my pieces that I take off into that. I also wear a protective glove on my non-working hand. I never know what's inside these reels, and I would prefer to keep them off my hand if I can. I have trouble wearing the glove on my right hand, which is my dominant hand, and as a result I don't wear a glove there. But when I'm doing the cleaning and that, I figure at least one hand covered is better than none, and that's why I use that. All right, so these 4 screws should be the same, and then the 3 screws that go into the reel seat, that's the part that connects the reel to the fishing rod, those are usually smaller. So we're just going to take a note here and see if that's the case. If it is, there'll be 3 screws that are slightly smaller, and that is the case. You'll notice that there is a difference in length here on the screws. And if you go to reinstall now, you make sure that the small screws go into the reel seat below here, these 3 sections. That's a good place to tell you to take pictures. If you are taking a reel apart for the first time or you're not familiar with that reel, then a picture is really a lifesaver in some times, because you'll forget the orientation of a reel, or you'll forget the particular look or feel of it, and then you'll kind of get frustrated and have problems with it. Inside is very clean, so what this is saying is that this reel just hasn't had grease. That's why it's turning as poorly as it's turning. It has been used hard. Here's an example of that. You'll notice that the click tongue here is almost completely worn off. And this is when it's peened on. There's no way to replace that. So going forward, this reel will not have a clicker. You can only see there's just basically a hair's width left on this click tongue. The majority of it is flattened out and will no longer work against the ridges on the back end of this spool. So that's something you just live with. There's no easy way to fix that. What we can do is we can clean the reel up on this side a little bit. Now I'll probably come back in and do a little bit bigger cleaning later. I'm just going to use a scrubby pad here just to take off some of the surface dust. I'll probably come back in later with a chrome polish and that, but for now you don't need to see me polishing up the reels. We're really talking about the mechanics here. I'm going to get this one going again. One of the ways you do that is you take that bushing on this side and give it a good coating of fishing reel grease. That'll make that run smoother. The fishing reel grease that I use is a Penn Precision reel grease that I mentioned from time to time. It doesn't matter which manufacturer's grease you use, just make sure that it is a fishing reel grease, and that will benefit you and the reel. It'll benefit the reel because it's designed for that. It'll benefit you because you won't have any premature wear of those greases, and you'll be better off for it. All right, here's how you remove this series then. There is a free spool jack and yoke here. A little bit different than the Penn reel setups that you might be familiar with. This one does not go forward and backwards like you would see on many reels. This one actually pulls out to release it. What that does is that tightens this whole thing and pulls it in to release from the studs on the spool. So we'll just do it so you, for the benefit of the camera, you'll see when it's in engage mode, this whole piece comes out, and those 4 slots there are going to grab the 2 studs, one or the other. So if you're cranking and you find a little delay in the spool actually setting in, it just means when it went to re-engage the spool that those studs landed here, and it'll actually take you a little bit of a turn to seat those 2 studs into this carrier. But that's how that works. Okay, so that's your free spool mechanism. I think we're going to spray here as well. These rarely break as well, but you really don't want to risk yourself if you don't have to in terms of snapping one of these off. If you do snap it, you're done. So this one connects right into the lever here, and that's metal on metal, and if it's not paid attention to, it could be that they freeze or rust and they could break off. You'd have to replace the rotor and this screw in order to get it back to working properly. All right, that screw is out. That's going to go in my tray. Again, another good opportunity to take a picture, see the setup, so that when you go to reinstall, you know where that is. You can remove this now. This is the jack. You just simply slide it out. There's 2 studs here. They both have indentations on the side that hold that. Slide it out. Notice which side goes where. It doesn't go this way. If you try to install it this way on the back end, you're going to have some trouble. 2 springs, it'll give you trouble if you don't remove them right now, so remove those and put those into the parts tray. That provides the tension on the free spool release. And while you're at it, you can take out that free spool mechanism. Doesn't hurt to put a little bit of oil on this one. It's metal on metal, but go ahead and oil that just to make sure that it stays nice and flexible for the duration. All right, this came out when I just took my fingers off of it. This is a 2-stage pinion gear. You have a sleeve that's called a yoke, and you have a carrier for the pinion gear. That's what we were talking about before with the slots that'll go on to the spool. And with that off, you can probably see it a little bit better. You can see how they merge in here. I hope you can see. It's kind of hard with the camera, but that's one of the slots filled. And again, if you cast your reel, put it back in free spool, you may find that it kind of is not set yet, and that quarter turn will set that down completely. This is your pinion gear. Your pinion gear, notice the orientation of it. The rectangular side comes up, the gear side down, and on this sleeve, it goes this way with the slots facing out. When you have your pinion gear, you want to check this, make sure that it's clean. Well, in this case, everything's so dried out, it's very clean. And you just want to make sure that all of the teeth have good orientation, that they're all parallel to each other, that there's no grease or anything filling those gaps. And then you can make some grease and get the grease back where it belongs. This will definitely make the reel ride smoother. Okay. If you like this kind of video, I'd ask you to subscribe. And if you do subscribe, I would ask you to hit notifications. That way you'll see all the videos that I'm posting. And you can choose which ones you want to view. I do all kinds of work. In this case, I'm working on a classic reel. I work on spinners, bait casters. I work on conventional reels. And just about any reel that was made, new, old, and in between. Whatever comes into my shop, I try to do a video on it if I don't have one in my library. And if I don't have one in my library, I try to supplement it so that I can show folks how to do it in the future if and when they decide to do the maintenance on their reel. A good coat of grease onto the shoulders of that yoke. That shoulder goes into the slot, and we're just going to set that aside in the parts tray. There's 2 more springs here that you need to pay attention to. Both of these can shoot out as well. They're very big springs. So make sure that you remove them at this time before you go to remove the main gear. This is your main gear assembly. There's 2 screws holding that on. So if you come to this side plate, you don't have to remove these 2 top screws. However, there is a recommendation. If you do have a bridge that does not have the anti-reverse connected to the bridge, in this case it's connected by a spring, we'll show you how that operates on the other side. But if you have one where you need to insert the anti-reverse spring underneath this bridge plate, then you're going to need to remove one or both of these carriers in order to swing this bridge around it and properly mount that. So just be aware that could be an issue if you're not working on this specific model and setup. These reels were first made in the 1930s. They were made in Philadelphia. And I'm going to do a history of the Ocean City Fishing Reel Company, but that was started as a company that was in the sporting goods business that needed some fishing reels. Initially, they contracted to have the reels made, and then they decided to get into the manufacture business themselves. Somehow, they're most noted for one of their employees who left and founded Pen Reels. And the founding of Pen Reels was to provide a cheaper alternative to the ones that Ocean City was selling. All right, so here's your gear stack that simply removes off. And I think these washers for the most part seem to be in fairly good condition. They're flexible, and that's all you can ask of a washer. And they're leather, so they should last. A lot of times these things will dry out, so do a test. If it still has flexibility, you can reuse them, and we're going to do that here. If it snaps, well, then it needs to be replaced. So test each one of them. In this case, there seems to be some oil on there, and that seems to have held up good. One more thing you want to do is to remove this bridge sleeve here. There's a pin. We'll see after all these years if we can push that pin out or not. Sometimes it's easier to do than others. And I'm using a little punch here. And sure enough, I'm able to get the start on removing that pin. You can see how it sits proud of that now. That was by inserting the little punch on the other side. And then you can finish taking that off with a pliers. Just be careful. You don't want to rough up the edges there. Just simply kind of rock it out like that. And then you can remove that gear sleeve as well. You want to do that just so you get a nice thorough cleaning of the reel. I think what we're seeing on the oil side of this is probably just the penetrating oil that was sprayed in, because we know this reel was very dry when we opened it up. I'm just resetting this pin to get it started. You don't want to push it in too far, because if you push it in too far like that, it's going to interfere with reloading it. So I'll just back that out and we'll service this drag set. I'm going to put that into my tray now, and this is your anti-reverse dog. And the reason why it hasn't fallen off of the bridge is it's got a spring connector on the back there. So pay attention to that. Take a picture of it if you like, because if that spring comes loose, you're going to wonder how it got installed. We're going to use a cotton swab here just to kind of clean off the base. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not in any way at an issue. We're going to do the same thing here that we did with the pinion gear. We're going to check the main gear. It's a beautiful one. The metal is still sharp and bright and shiny after 60 plus years. And we're just going to use a hard brush to knock anything out of those channels. Now there's nothing in there, so I don't worry too much about getting something on my workbench here. But if there was, go ahead and put a paper towel down underneath it. That'll help you take the old stuff off and not get it onto a transference piece next time you go to put the reel in. All right, so we've cleaned that. We've put some grease onto the gear shaft. We're going to reinstall the gear sleeve. Push down all the way. Make sure you have the clearance on your anti-reverse dog. And we can push this in. And you may need an assist from your pliers for that last little bit there. There's a groove that's riding in. And you need to make sure that this little point here sits flush. Otherwise, that main gear is not going to clear it. So I'm just going to press down with the tip of my pliers just to make sure that it's clear, and you'll feel it if it's sitting proud. Okay, we have that main gear. Then we're going to do the same thing we did with the pinion gear. We're going to come in and we're going to grease this up. I'm confident with what I'm seeing in this reel that this one's going to hum and work very nicely once this is all reassembled. All right, main gear goes on. So you had that little hard washer underneath the main gear. Now you've got 3 metal gears and 3 drag washers. And I think, I'm going to just grab one here. I believe that if you needed to replace these drag washers, that the Penn 155 series washer, again, these companies weren't related, but this washer and this washer are identical. So if you needed to, you could use a Penn 155 Beachmaster washer as a substitute for the original washers. But these are okay. So there's no need to replace them. We're just simply going to use some Cal's universal drag grease here. I'm going to put that onto the leather washers. Now, leather washers are permeable, so you want to get some grease rubbed into there. And if you put too much on there, go ahead and wipe it off. And this is just to help them remain flexible. It doesn't give them any more gripping power or anything like that. If these were clogged with grease or dirt or anything, go ahead and use some steel wool or a scrubby pad like this. Go ahead and wipe down the excess. That's the top one. And then this is your order. You have 2 keyed washers. Those are the ones with the rectangles. They sit on the outside, and the inner washer is the eared washer. So let's go ahead and put that one on. I'm going to repeat this process again. We'll get some dry grease onto that second washer. Put that one on. And now the middle washer is the one with the 2 points on it, the ears. And when you go to install these, find the slots in the main gear, because you're going to push down on that and you're going to seat this in there. That helps when you go compress your drag stack. Those 2 ears hold the main gear steady. The other 2 hold the shaft steady, and between them you've got the friction to control the drag stack. All right, so that's our setup there. All right, so we're just going to make sure that the case is clean, and as I mentioned, this is a case where too little lubrication. A lot of folks ask, top failure points. Well, one of them is too little grease, and interestingly enough, another common failure is too much grease. So in this case, this reel's failing, or is just acting tight because there really isn't any grease there. I'm going to use a rod and reel cleaner. I know I said I'm going to come back and clean this later. I'm going to use Penn's rod and reel cleaner here just to take some of this off. It's easier to do that if you have the side plate off and you have to work around the crossbars. I'll just do that right now. I'm also going to use that on the outside face. These side plate faces are very nice. Most of the time they have UV fade by this point. Some chips, cracks, all those kinds of things. In this case, this reel is just in very nice condition. It even has its original badge, and really hasn't been used much, as evidenced by those drags and as evidenced by the main gear. So once you take off a side plate of a reel, you can get a history of a reel in a hurry in terms of understanding how it's been used and what condition it's in. I mean, sometimes you can open up, see a reel on the outside looks beautiful, and then you open up the inside and realize that it wasn't as well taken care of as you thought. All right, we're going to reassemble this reel now. First thing to do is exactly what we did on the other side. We want to get some grease into the cavity for that bushing there. We're going to take the main gear next, kind of the reverse of the way that it came out. So remember, we got this on the bottom. We're going to line this in straight. Now, if you don't have that dog attached to the bridge like we do here, then what you want to do is pull this pin out, because you're going to have to set it this way, load the dog, and then cover it up. You can see that there's a cavity in here, and that's because the side plate did come with a floating dog spring similar to a pen, where you would load the dog here and put a spring in this cavity. But in this case, the design has changed and you don't need that cavity. But if you do have that set up, remove this pin so that you can set it this way and then rotate around without hitting the pin. You'll see it'll hit the pin here if you did it that way. All right, we load this in simply by lining it up. And this one's just kind of a little tricky because of this dog with the spring. You're going to have to work on this one when you go to put the bridge screws back. So I'm going to put the one that doesn't affect the dog in first, and we'll tighten it down most of the way. I'm not going to tighten it down completely, but we'll tighten it down most of the way. We'll come back and tighten it up the rest of the way. You'll see that that hole is a little bit off center now when you got to put the other bridge in, a bridge screw. So what I like to do is put that in, and then you can generally push up. In this case, it just pushed it up itself, but if you have any problem, just push up on that dog a little bit using that spring release, and you will center that hole. All right, now we can tighten both of these up. If you have any questions on this reel or any reel in particular, if you're stumped, maybe you're working on a reel and you just forgot a sequence, or something popped out, you weren't quite sure what it was, and now you're having one of those moments, leave the questions in the comments section. I do try to answer as many of them as I can, and I won't guarantee you that I'll know the answer on everything, but I'll try my best to help you out of a tough situation if you leave it in the comments. All right, those two big screws then go over these pivot parts. Remember, if you remove this one, what you want to do when you go to reinstall is this has a slot and it needs to be perpendicular. That slot needs to face inward and it needs to be perpendicular to that bridge there. So if you did take this off, make sure that it's that way, otherwise that jack will not install properly. All right, we got that. The next step then is our yoke and carrier and pinion gear. You're going to put those over those two posts, and you're going to push down evenly with some pressure to compress those springs. Now, I've found over the years of working on these reels that it's very easy to get a spring caught in this carrier. So just be easy with it. Press it down, and you know you're good again when you see these slots are cleared on both sides. Next up then is the two springs that act as the lever point on the free spool. And we're going to take that freshly oiled free spool release And insert that, and I'm holding that on the back with my finger so that it doesn't go. Now we can take this. Remember what we said, if you're looking at the profile of this, the bent angles are actually the underside of that. Grab the profile and put those in to the two slots like that. Push down on the top of this and find that screw. Get that started in your free spool release. So this is a little bit of coordination here, but done enough times, you generally will get it. Sometimes, if you don't have the right finger pressure, this thing will slide around, so just be patient. One of my friends told me early on in this career, if you will, that you need a couple of things to properly repair reels. At the top of it was patience and a sense of humor. And I think he's right. I think the mechanical knowledge and the other things can come along, but for sure you need your patience and a sense of humor. Tighten that all the way down. Give it a test to make sure that it pulls that in. It does. Make sure that it locks on this side. If it doesn't lock on this side, you've over-tightened this. And that doesn't happen too much on these reels, but it does happen on other Ocean City reels of that sort. So just be aware of that. Give it a turn. Make sure everything's done before you start concerning yourself with putting the reel back together. We're going to put the gear sleeve on now. Next up will be this star adjuster. Just going to use that little scrubby pad to take some of that wear off. You'll notice that we have the wear from that tension washer is on this, so I know that's the upside. If you were wondering about that, you could always go back and look at your pictures that you were taking. Of course, I'm taking pictures. I'm doing it on a video camera. And don't for a moment think that I don't go back from time to time and have to look. Particularly if it's a reel that I don't see very often. I'll go back and take a look if I have any questions whatsoever. It's just a good practice, and it's one I recommend that you follow. Just struggling a little bit here to get that first set. This one needs to go on square. If it doesn't go on square, you're going to start cross-stripping. And if you start cross-stripping it, it's hard to find a part for a 50-plus-year-old reel. So try and get it started. Just be patient. There you go. We got it. And there's two slots in here, but you can use anything to anchor that post. Just be careful. There is threads inside here for that screw, so don't go crazy with what you're doing there, but just be aware that you can anchor something inside to hold it if needed. Do the same thing here. We put that penetrating on there before. Now I'm going to put the handle on just to hold it so I can tighten down on the drag system. Those threads that we're working on there that are a little tight, they usually get jammed with salt water and the like because they're exposed. So just once you work through there, the last turn or two should be easy. Now we're putting that tension washer back on, the handle back on, the handle nut. And I guess what I can do, I probably should do, take that handle off. It's easier to put the spool on. And again, I recommend every time you bring a reel in for service, get rid of the line. Line is cheap. So either this reel hasn't been serviced in 20 years or somebody was just being particularly frugal. But we can tell from the evidence inside. This just has sat in the barn, as I was told, for quite some time. I will take that line off for sure. All right, then we're just going to put a little bit of grease onto the shaft here. Let's go install on the one side. Now we can install on the other side. And it usually helps when you're installing. In this case, it doesn't seem to be much of a problem. But if you find that you have a gap as you go to put the plate on, put the reel into free spool. It will eliminate that gap for you. All right. When I go to reinstall these, then I'm going to go in a opposing pattern. So I'm going to go one over here. I'm going to use the other screwdriver. It's a little bit easier. Remember, long screws go in the cross posts, short screws go in the reel seat. So we're going to kind of go around the horn here. I'm going to take that. By going opposite directions on the reel, you're going to keep equal tension on that side plate to make sure that you're not warping in. So one to the bottom, one to the top. Next one, we'll take one of the short screws. We'll come in, let's go for the middle hole there on the reel seat. We'll put that in, then we're going to repeat. We'll come back over here, we'll put the second long screw in, and follow that with one on the other crossbar section, and we'll go fill in the reel seat pieces. So this reel should operate nicely. When we're done here, we'll get rid of that old line. We'll do a little bit of the chrome cleanup there, and this one should be ready to go fishing. It is a nice example of a 1950s Ocean City 112 fishing reel. Very durable. It's lasted, and it lost the battle with Penn. Penn became a cheaper alternative, and the Penn 65 and the 60, the Long Beach series, were direct competitors to the 112 and 113 and the Bay City from Ocean City reels, and Penn won that battle. So we'll just put that last screw in here. No doubt that this thing is going to run beautifully. It just needed a little bit of TLC in the form of some new oils and greases, a little bit of cleaning. We'll make sure we get rid of that line. We'll clean up the spool and the chrome pieces, and this one will be ready to go fishing again. Alright, so do as much as you can with this handle screw by hand. And then you have the convenient wrench, and you just have to play with this one. You're going to need to align it before you can wrap it down. So just takes a little bit of an eyeball, but eventually you do get it. I think we pretty much have it there. Just need to, there's a little tension on this screw. That's probably because it needs to hold it flat to the handle, and you don't want that wrench jumping off. All right, let's give it a turn then. Well, there you go. We're a little tight on that bearing. That makes sense because we grease packed it. Look at this. What you're hearing there is that bad clicker. We'll take that bad clicker off. Look at this. A beautiful reel for the time and the age. And this one's going to clean up nicely with the chrome. I'll probably use some Flitz metal cleaner. When you can turn a reel like that, it's going to be effortless out there fishing on the ocean for the full day. So I hope you've enjoyed it. This is a fun little reel, and if you have one of those, by all means, take care of it, and it will take care of you. Please stay well, stay healthy, stay listening to our authorities regarding this pandemic. As much as we'd like to think it's over, it's not quite over yet. And stay fishing and stay watching. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.